Hey guys, hey everyone. I guess we're going to have this talk in English. Yes. We have a couple of people who will speak from here. I want to welcome you guys to this FP1 functional programming professional meetup group. It's always good to see new faces. And today I want to welcome Tibor Halter, who's going to present their company's project. It's called Boomla. It's not strictly using the functional programming language that we are used to, but it will contain some functional ideas, and hopefully you guys will take a lot away from this talk. So with that, I will hand it over to Tibor. Thank you very much for being here. And one last thought, I want to thank GMG, the Gizmo, for providing this venue. It's an awesome venue. So thanks guys. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So thank you for coming. I'll sit down because I'm going to use my computer to show you stuff in live. Okay. So before I start, I thought it might be useful if you have some questions that you interrupt me, because this system is very different from anything you've seen before, hopefully. But I don't want to make this talk too long if we go deeply into your questions. So in case it will start to take longer time, then we will interrupt and we just continue with the talk. So it's about a purely functional operating system called Boomla. It's functional, as you will see, in the architecture, but not in the programming language. So let's start. What you see here is one Boomla website, actually. So if I turn off full screen mode, you can see it's just a website. So I'm going to use this system to show during the presentation. Let's start with the overview. So what's the purpose of this system? The problem that we have is that web development complexity is going nuts. So the system tries to take the ideas that we have learned over the years, 30 years already, essentially take the ideas, and instead of giving yet another piece which you can plug into the system, into the puzzle of components which we have to use, and provide one integrated solution for the problem. So this is an application platform for websites. It's not an operating system in the sense that it's not controlling hardware, it's just the top layer that the user is interfacing, so from the file system upwards. It does have a downloadable version, so you can go to boomla.com, download it, and run it locally, or you can use it in the cloud, go to boomla.com, sign up, and create an account, create websites there. Okay, so let's start with file system basics. First of all, I want to remind you that there is no file. So we kind of think of files as if they would exist, but in reality, these files are actually just an abstraction, it's just an interface. And it's so good that we are we started to believe that they exist. Like, we are actually moving those files from our computer to the pen drive and so on. And if we believe that these files are real, we forgot that we could design a different kind of file system. So I just wanted to remind you of that. So in Boomla, files can contain other files. So just like a style.css file could contain an image, which we will see is kind of useful. The second biggest difference compared to traditional file systems is that Boomla, let me come from the other direction. So we have these file extensions, which were introduced in the 70s, 80s, I don't know. But they kind of cram an extra idea in the file name, which doesn't belong there. It's a hack. It's an ugly hack. It's like putting your address in your name. And every time you want to move to a different address, you would have to change your name, which is nuts. So we have this file extension, but it doesn't work on the web because your root file ends in your top-level domain. So if you own example.com, then you would be stuck with .com. So that obviously doesn't work. So for that reason, in this file system, we have a special file type attribute that defines the type of the file.
In the Unix-like world, the file can be a regular file, or a directory, or a symbolic link, or etc. I guess this is not the type that you are referring to.
No, exactly, it's not. So in Boomla, there's just, actually we will see that there are there's a similar concept. I don't want to go into that right now, but yeah, so the file type is essentially, I think it will be clearest if we look into the object-oriented approach, but essentially it's assigning an application to the file which defines its behavior, just like this.
You mean assigns like a class that can behave in some sort of way?
Yeah, exactly. So Boomla is object-oriented. Just like in object-oriented programming, you could have a class and you would have various methods defined on that class. Similarly, in Boomla, you would create a file that would be a class or an application by setting its type to app1. And the methods would be stored in child files. And for each such method, so for example, the .request method will serve requests. You would specify a virtual machine or an interpreter which is going to execute the contents of this file. So for example, to write JavaScript code, currently you have to use this SJS3 interpreter, and that would serve requests. So for example, this code snippet here, response body hello world, and response attribute string, this is written in JavaScript again, sets the content type, and that should work. So actually, let's go and see this, because I believe, actually, I want to create a new site for that. I'm on the control panel now, on boomla.com. I scroll down, create a new website. Let's start with an empty file system, test whatever. Create it, okay. So this is an empty website. I'm going to the IDE, and this is the root file. So let's create a page named foo inside it. Set its type to, can you see it? Good. Set its type to app1, and go inside it, create this .request file, set its type to sjs3, save, and so that was the file properties or metadata. And now I'm going to click the file body, which is empty, and copy this here, save, close this, go back, and I want to open this foo by clicking the open link, and it says hello world, so it works. Okay, I close that.
Okay, so the foo contains that source code, and what does app1 contain?
App1 is just like the keyword class in object-oriented programming. So you define that this foo file is going to contain an application. And then you give it a child file named .request, which is going to actually be executed to serve the request.
Okay, so app1 is it's a bit of like a programming language on its own, or?
No, it's a meta type. It's just telling the runtime of Boomla that, okay, we have an application here. So if actually the purpose of app1 is, if in the future we realize that the runtime of Boomla could be better, then we could introduce app2, which is a different runtime, and we would not have to break old websites. So we could introduce a new type, a new Boomla runtime. Without breaking.
Okay, so there are not much options right now other than app1 and SJS3.
Exactly. Let me show you, if we go to boomla.com, developers, built-in types, you can see these. So for example, there's a JavaScript interpreter, there's this app1, there is CSS for CSS modules, we have raw HTML, images which provide you resizing features, markdown, and returning static assets. Okay. All right. So prototypes. So object-oriented programming has these two worlds. We have a class-based and prototype-based object-oriented programming. Boomla is prototype-based. So the biggest difference is this constructor. In class-based, we have these constructors. In Boomla, we don't have those. And we do have a type chain. So let's say it's like this app is like the foo file. So essentially, we created an application here. And if we want to create an instance of that application so that we are reusing the code, we can just set its type to point to the path of that application. Make sense? Good.
This can be a relative path as well?
Yeah. Special files. So when this request file is executed, so the code we have in here, there are some special variables injected in this virtual machine. One of them is f, which is essentially this in object-oriented programming. because some languages. So Boomla is not tied to a single language. In the future, I hope to introduce various other languages, and often this is a reserved word, so we can't use it. So for that reason, we are using F. Then all the input of the application is accessible through the request variable, and your response, you can return it by writing the response file. So for example, you see it being written here. There's an app file, which is simply a reference to the .request file. And there's a context, which we will see later, or might see later. Actually, we won't. Never mind. Built-in types, that's the list we have seen a second ago. Static files. So we have this concept of static files on the web, which generally means that your web server is taking a file without applying any changes to it and just returns it to the visitor. But I want to remind you that there is still an application running in the background. It sets the response headers. And the problem is that often these magic MIME times, or whatever they call them, are hidden from you. So essentially they are out of grasp. And Boomla makes it much more flexible by having this type field. You can always override what application is serving your response. So we do have the static one file type, which is considering the file extension or a special attribute of the file to set the file type, but you can always go and replace how that works. And if you want to serve a static PNG file, you can always comment, replace it with your own code so that you can make any changes you want. So there is no static, as it means without running any code, doesn't exist in Boomla. Everything is dynamic. You can always override everything. Placeholders. So if you want to build a website, you will often face the problem that, or not the problem, the situation that you have multiple placeholders. And for that reason, the Boomla file system has another special feature, namely that if you have a file, the children of that file are not stored in one box. They are actually 256 boxes in it. So if you just want to get the children of that file, you can ignore this fact and just get all the children. So then it behaves like it would be one big box. But you can also treat it as 256 placeholders and put the files in separate boxes. This is just going to be super useful when you want to write themes. And let's look at themes. So how would a web page or a theme work? We have this theme app. As we can see, it's an app. Oops, there's a typo. So we have this request file and maybe some other files, and then we create an instance of that theme. Now, we want to separate concern here. So for example, if we look at this layout, typically the blue areas would belong to the page or the theme. And the red area would be the part of the page that would be the concern of the individual instances of that page. So that's where the F variable becomes useful because it points to the page instance and not the application. And that way you can get the children of the file, which are these, and just call the render or the inline method on them to actually display those on the website. Yeah, and I have an example here. So let's close these, open the IDE again, and there's this example page. Let me go there, and you see it's a very simplistic theme, which has a menu and a content area. And if I go into example, we see there's this request file, which should be familiar by now, which contains just a little HTML layout, and it's setting the content type as well and returning it to the user. And there's this crucial part here. Maybe I zoomed it a little bit too much. So what this does, this os.inline f.query. So f is the page instance. .query allows us to query the file system, essentially find or get various files. And what we do here is this :C, there are very few of these selectors. :C is selecting content, and :1 is selecting all the files from box 1, so this placeholder 1. And this is returning a collection, so all the files that are in this placeholder, and then os.inline just calls the .inline method. We have seen this .request method there's a .inline method which is rendering those files. And then the page is returned. What I want to call your attention to is that here you are actually in control all the time, because when the request file is executed, you are essentially given control for serving this request. And from then on, you are going to call locate files, render them like components, and do with the responses of these individual files as you want. So essentially, you are in control, just like in functional programming, and you are not. There's this Hollywood principle that you don't call them, they call you. So that's the problem with frameworks that we don't like. Okay, and so now we have this theme. Actually, let's try to use this. So I go level up, and we have this page which we are on, basics/theme. And if I close that and go up, I can use this application, this example application, as the type of the page which we have been on. So this page, right? And so it's called theme. So I find it in among the files, which is here. Right now it's using /app/page. So let's change it to ./example. So it's resolved to, like, it's looking for the example file within that file. So let me save it and refresh that. And as you can see, the contents are taken from the page where we were, but everything else is now coming from the app. So the blue parts were the concern of the application. Let me just undo it. Now you can see undo and redo in action in Boomla. We'll get back to this later. Pages. There is a page interface. So the existence of a page file is marking the application as a page. So that makes it show up in the menu. So if I go back to theme, you can see the example page shows up in the menu. If I go to the IDE, into theme and example, you can see next to this request file, there's a .page file. So if I go and remove this and refresh this, the example page or menu entry is gone. So it's just helping find pages for the purpose of displaying them on the menu. Contents. So to render a content, it has to implement the .inline interface. Again, it's the file name must be .inline. So an example would be simply hello world. You don't need to set the content type in this case. Attributes. So the file type is a file property, which means it's system defined. There are a few more, and there are file attributes. Attributes are user defined, so you can store your custom anything there. And attributes are strongly typed, and they allow us to effectively store anything on the Boomla file system that we could store in a database. And this equivalency essentially addresses any of your doubts if you have. Can we store this in this file system? Of course, if you can store it in a database, there's a mapping which allows you to store it there. So let me just start Paint to quickly draw it for you. So let's imagine this is, I can draw beautifully. This is database containing tables, containing individual rows. And the equivalent structure would be to have a file, or maybe draw it like this, to have a file for the database containing, obviously, the same structure. And the file attributes would be stored in the bottom file, just like in case of database rows. Okay, head. So this is a crucial trick. So contents on the page might want to return code snippets that need to be injected in the head of the HTML response. So scripts, style sheets, fonts, no, these are style sheets, whatever. Essentially, the Boomla file attributes are used for that purpose. So there's an attribute called head, and anything, for example, this, if you write it in the response head, it will be injected into the response head. So that way, each component can very cleanly return a single response like it in functional programming. Files are ordered. So if I show you this structure, these are 3 distinct contents in the file system. You can see they are A, B, C. And now if I grab C and move it before A and refresh on the file system, C will go up. So the same order is stored on the file system, what we can see displayed on the website, which is very useful because we can forget about order ID fields. If you're like me, you hate them because I don't think about modifying order IDs. I think about grabbing that thing and putting it after the last one. So that's how Boomla works. Okay, so that were the basics. Let's see some more advanced stuff. Boomla offers CSS modules out of the box. So essentially, if we want to write a component, content on the file or for the entire page, we can just write simple CSS rules which are not namespace, so could collide otherwise, and they are turned into namespace versions if we use the CSS2 type. Essentially, the way we can use it in JavaScript is we locate the file which is containing that CSS code, and then we call this response.add_CSS module. Essentially, what it does is it calculates, it reads the CSS and creates a mapping for us so that we can later reference the CSS classes cleanly. And I think you probably know this, or it's not as much relevant to Boomla. It's just CSS models. So if you want to look it up, go look for CSS modules. So this allows for CSS namespacing. Let's talk about external dependencies. So I mentioned that we can store files in files just like storing a background image or a pattern in a style.css file. This is very useful because it allows us to so the problem was that we had an assets directory, an images directory, which was full of images, and nobody dares to touch anything. It's an append-only directory, just like the old CSS files are append-only files. You always write to the end. And by allowing to store files in files, we essentially store this external dependency problem. So all these images which are referenced by that style sheet, we can put it in there, and it's super clean. And you can even move that style sheet to a different website if you want, because it contains no external dependencies.
That is the image shared between the systems.
You can do that if you want. It's an option. So the system tries to give you tools. At some places it enforces what you do. But not always. And so in this case, it makes sense to have central images, so it doesn't force you to use it otherwise. Applications. We have the same concept for applications. So an application could contain all the dependencies it requires. So one example I have at hand to show you how it works. Here's a demo. So what this application does, it allows you to search for any word on the website. So let's search for hamburger. I can't write, obviously. Okay. Search for hamburger, and it gives us this other page which contains hamburger surprise. Okay, so I want this application on my own website because it would be cool to have search functionality. So let me just open it and see my website as well, and that one. And I own both websites, so security issue-wise. Or access control issue-wise. So I can just grab this file and put it on my website. And because it has no external dependencies, let's search for app, it will just find all those for me. So this is an example for an app which has no external dependencies. I just moved it across websites. I think it's pretty cool. Okay. Transactional. So global is evil, and the file system is usually a global. And we kind of consider it the big guy in the room who is we are okay with because it's too big for us to attack heads-on. So Boomla addresses this issue by so the Boomla file system is copy and write. Every change to the file system creates a new file system, just like in functional programming. And this allows us to pass around the file system just like we pass around values within our programs. Now the problem here is that working with files, we often work with not only one file but more of them. So in case every time we write the file system, it would create a new file system, and all our references would still point to the old file system. That would not be very useful. So for that reason, the applications that run in Boomla, so for example, when a request comes and this request file is executed, it executes in an isolated environment. There, the file system is, well, it's transactional, so it's, the original file system is forked, so we can work with this forked file system, but within this isolated virtual machine, the file system is essentially, it appears to be mutable, but if we run a subcomponent, we execute another application, the file system will be forked again, and it will be automatically committed if it succeeds, so we don't have to worry about partial changes that are applied to the file system. Essentially, we don't need to worry about the whole class of problems. All right, version control. So you have seen I was pressing undo redo while I was making some changes. And essentially, as the so every time a new file system is created, and these file systems are chained and tracked. So if you make a change and you don't like it, you can just undo it, and it's super fast because it's just a hash reference. Essentially, it's stored in Merkle trees just like Git. Similarly, we can commit and check out versions. So for example, if I go to the control panel, and we are on this website right now, I can say the others are all committed. Here's one uncommitted change. We can scroll down and see that I added the search app. So I could say, okay, I want to commit it, add search app, commit, and there, if I go to the history, you can see I added it. You can see all the previous commits. We can check it out, etc. Just the user features. We can push and pull a website because it contains no external dependencies, and because between the platform and your website, there's nothing else. So typically, if you have a Linux host and your website and you host a website on it, it's in a subdirectory of the system, which means there's a place between your website and the platform where you can install other programs. That's a huge problem because we lose the possibility to simply move the website from one place to another. So Boomla, because the root file is the root file of your website, there's no possibility to install anything between the platform and your website. So the platform is essentially immutable unless you upgrade, in which case it's a rolling change. And we have branching and merging. Installing apps. That's an interesting one. So there's this hooker.boomla.net website. Super simple, just one theme. Let's say I want to install it on my website. So let's do that. I open the IDE, and I'm going to use this import hooker.boomla.net link. So open IDE, create a new file for, just name it hooker, and set its link property, which we haven't discussed yet, to point to import hooker.boomla.net. So if I save this, what's going to happen is going to mount this other website into ours by its hash. So it will be mounted in an immutable way, and we will be able to explore it. If I hit save, sometimes there's a pop-up with an error. Let's see, yeah, that you can't access it immediately within 1 second. It's for various reasons. I just wanted to disallow it to whatever. Essentially, here's the entire file system within that application or within that file. So this is hooker.boomla.net within our website. And if I go level up, we can even open this. Classic. So what I wanted to show you is that there is no chance for this to break, and now it breaks. It never happened before for over a year. I have no idea. So normally this should work. I just realized I'm using a... Anyway, that's actually the problem of the application because it's looking for a file to exist in the wrong place in the client and not on the server. Anyway, the website roughly works. Okay, that's a programming issue that was happening in the client, I just realized. But normally you install a website and that shouldn't happen. So the documentation for the app will be at hand for you so that if you want to look up the documentation for an app you have installed, it will be the same version as the one you have installed. So it's not separate from your application. Well, because applications are bundled within within a website, within a volume. So the documentation and the application go together. Updating apps. Oh, actually, I wanted to show you as well how to install on the graphical user interface. So how do we create new files? So I just come into the toolbar and grab a gallery and move it onto the page. That's how I create a gallery, and then I can upload images into it, etc. So how do I install a new program or application? I go to New, and there's Install More, which brings us to the Boomla application store. There are not too many, honestly. We're just going to add more. So there's actually this search app, so let's install it. It asks me where I want to install it. Meetup.boomla.net, the last one, add it to the toolbar. Let's refresh this, New, and the search app is added here. So let's add it, and there you go, there it is. So it's super simple to install applications. Even non-technical users can do that. How to upgrade an application. Updating apps. I go to the control panel. There is this application button. And these are the installed applications. We can update them individually or all of them at once. So let's update all apps, and surprise, there are no changes right now. So what this does is, if I open the IDE, actually we were in, sorry for clicking so much. So there's this one Huko, which I just imported. And if I open the file properties, you can see there's this hash which is injected, which identifies the state of that volume of that website. And if I just remove it and save it and reopen these file properties, the system will refetch it and remount it into its place. So in this case, there were no changes. But otherwise, if there would be, you could just update these applications like that. Sandboxing. There's this application. It's super simple. It just says, I'm OK. Let's open the IDE. This is this demo app. You can see it's an application. I go in it. There's this inline file which contains some JavaScript code which says, well, I'm OK. And there's a function which doesn't exist. Let me uncomment it, save it, and refresh this page. And what you can see is that the error was caught. So it doesn't take down the entire website. And it makes debugging a lot easier. And essentially, just like in functional programming, you get the result returned, and you don't have to catch it somehow. And also, all the changes it has made are rolled back in case there were, as I mentioned before. And because it didn't bring down the entire page, you still have this toolbar and the undo functionality here, so you can just hit undo and save the world, your little world. Type chain. So, well, we can have an application and use it as a file type, but obviously we can create a longer type chain too. This is very useful if you want to, for example, customize applications. So, for example, new gallery. If I create a gallery here, actually I need some images. Okay, this gallery right now maximizes 3 images per row. And I can open the context menu and say I want maximum 5 images per row. But what I'm doing here, there is this Customize Gallery button. You can see there are 2 options. I can either change, this is not the number of images. It's not possible to centrally change it. But essentially, this is the one which we are inheriting. So for example, the aspect ratio, let's give it some nonsense value for. This is, if I change it here, it will affect every gallery, so even future galleries. Otherwise, if we were to set this attribute on the instance, then obviously it doesn't inherit. So you can do that. Actually, there's this customization page. So you can do that for attributes, and there's a built-in way of getting attributes from the type chain. So the closest defined value. Or you can also do that for files. So for example, if you want to override a background image, you can do that for files as well. Extending the context menu, as you have seen, when I click the, where was this? this icon of the gallery, you can see that there are some custom entries. So if you want to create an application and your custom entries, you have to implement the context menu interface. Go look it up in the documentation. Okay, type safe, drag and drop. So you can see that if I grab this, there's a highlighter or a highlight helper, which if I move my mouse, you can see the edges, like edges of this component. So if I grab this, I can drag it before the title, after the title, but not into the title. And obviously, if I would drop it in there, it wouldn't make sense because that application can't handle it. So Boomla gives type safety for drag and drop, which is something we can achieve through creating a .accept file, and its attributes allow us to do that, to configure that. So for example, placeholder1.inline means placeholder1 is accepting inline, so essentially contents, anything that implements the inline interface, and the same way placeholder2 is accepting pages. There's also this accept1 file type, which allows us to, essentially if we are visiting such an accept file, it's validating the file. So if, in case we made some typos, it helps. So columns, let me drop a column in here, 2 columns to the end. You can see there are 2 columns. And then let me drop whatever, a gallery in the left one and a new gallery in the right one. So just like we can compose functions, we can compose these applications on the front end. I think it's just super interesting that we can build, like use these building blocks. So a little theory. So in Boomla, there are no processes, just functions, just like in function programming, and that makes working with it super easy. It's also very much like the web, so it kind of fits the problem space. That's why it was going that route, because the web is built on request response model. The web also needs high concurrency because there are so many users. And essentially, to try to solve this problem with a process-based, with an imperative system, it's super hard. For example, just the very simple problem of uploading an image on a regular website faces hard problems like, first of all, where do you store it? In the database or in the file system? There are no right solutions. The database is crap because for performance reasons. The file system is crap because if the upload fails, how do you have to manually roll it back? Like, so essentially, there's no right place for storing data. Apps are isolated, which is nice because Boomla is enforcing this functional architecture. There's no way to escape it, which means if you're installing apps, you're guaranteed that it's going to play by the rules. It's transactional, so I explained that, and that it can be in the future programs in multiple languages. That's a plan. Actually, there is a user who is playing a lot with Boomla, who created a transpiler, or actually a transpile helper. We could call that a higher level, higher order application, because it's taking, essentially it's a helper for writing transpilers. He's playing a lot with that. Referential transparency. So the Boomla file system gives better primitives for managing dependencies, which is useful. It gives us scoped imports so that if we import another volume, it's scoped so that we can, for example, within this website which we have imported, the root file refers not to our root, but the imported root. And that's important because their dependencies are resolved relative to that inner root. So this helps to manage dependencies. And as I've said, there's nothing between your website and the platform that could break. Architecture. So generally, the functional programming as an architecture is super simple, but for some reason, the bigger part of the population considers functional programming languages hard. On the other hand, imperative programming languages are considered simple, yet their architecture are much harder. So Boomla kind of finds an interesting middle ground where we can marry the functional architecture with imperative languages. I just find it interesting. And I would like to show you how to write a to-do app in Boomla. So let's do that. So first of all, let's create an application of type up1, an instance of that to-do instance. Let's put it to the end. And I have to put it in placeholder 1, but because I dropped it after title, the placeholder is automatically adjusted. And I can set its type to be app. Okay, so now if I refresh this page, it will say the inline method is not defined for this file, which makes sense as the application file doesn't contain it. So let's create an inline file. Should be happy. No, it's not. Missing file type for that file. Yeah, we didn't give it any file type. Let's do that. SJS3, save. Now we don't get any errors. So what you see is that Boomla is kind of holding your hand and helps you build applications. And so what do we want to do? We want to, when the user, actually, so we want to show a form. We want to show all to-dos. And maybe we want to store submitted to-dos. So the form should be, let me just define it in line here. I don't want to make it too perfect. I just want to make it in least time. So action should be, so this should be routed back to the same site where we are on, and method should be post, maybe, and within here, let's make it minimalistic. I just show an input field, type text, name, I'll fill it in a moment, and value should be empty for now. And so as for the name, we could call it message, actually no, to-do entry or just entry, but that would not be namespace, which means if we have two to-do apps on the same page, that would collide. So we want to prefix it, and for that, let me do this at the top. So our to-do instance is f, and we can call f.prefix variable, and we can say entry here, and that would give us a prefixed variable name. So let's call it variable entry, var entry. And now we can use this here that will not collide. So it will just have a prefix. And okay, essentially that's the form, super minimal. I don't want a button, we will just hit enter.
Equals after value, the input type and
this one, thanks a lot. Thank you. Okay, let's show all the to-dos. Actually, let's store them first. So when the request comes in, there will be the request file, request, will have an attribute of type string with that name. So let's assign it to entry, and if that exists, it's not an ideal code, I know that, I just want to make it in a quick. So if that exists, then we want to create a new file, which we can create with f.new, and we want to put it to the top, so let's prepend it to the parent, and also rename it if it os.rename, if it exists. The name shall be just entry, doesn't matter, and put it in placeholder 0. So that will be the to-do entry file, and we want to set the body of that file to whatever was passed to us. So that will create a file, set its body, we are done. There is no file handler that we have to close or whatever. It's just as is. Okay, and let's show all of them. f.children is going to return all the to-dos. And we can say to-dos.each function and to-do, or maybe to-do entry, or to-do entry file, if you want to be like above. And we can say, just append it to the same, to the response. So to-do entry file.body, and maybe you want to encode it, HTML encode it, which you can do with util.html encode. And hopefully, it should work. Maybe we want to also give it, just make it quick, just 2 lines, and 2 line breaks and the new line. And let's see if it burns. Of course it does, it always does. Interesting. Okay, response.body. I forgot to actually write it to response. Reference account. Okay, response. Okay, so there's a field. Eat pizza. Enter. It's added. If I refresh. No, I don't want that. Just like that. Okay. So if I add new entries, it just works. And also, we could create a new instance by, let's add it to the toolbar first. So this is the root file. In the root file, there's a sys new file. Anything that's here is in the toolbar's new tab, so I can just add it to the toolbar by saying maybe to do. Actually, that's a file name that can be small. That should be to do uppercase, and the file type shall be, actually, let me go here and copy the path. So that was our application. So I'm going to copy it relative to the root, save it. And if I now refresh this page, new, it's at the front. We can add it at the end, and it should be adding it to the new to-do app instance. And also, it's let me add a couple more features because it's interesting. So for example, the system can recognize that this is a file. If I wrap it in a div and say -div, and there are a few classes. You can find it on documentation as well. Developers, applications, user interface, O1 file. So that's what we are using now. If I add O1 file, the system will recognize this div as a file. I need to add data O1 path, and that shall be the path of our to-do entry. So this dot path. And now the system will recognize that this is a file. So we'll get an icon, which is cool because now we can grab it and we can't drop it yet. That's because by default, applications are not accepting drops, so we have to define what we are accepting. So we have to go inside our application, and now we have this problem that we actually have this to-do instance, the to-do application and the entries. So we have to separate the two, and we have to create a to-do entry app, which we are going to use to specify the interface. So on this to-do entry app, I set the type to be app1, and inside it, we create this. Now we have so to-do entries will have an interface that the to-do app is accepting. So we have to define a random interface name just to make the interfaces work. So let's call it dot to-do entry, maybe. Okay, and it doesn't need any type, it exists, that's enough. And on our to-do app, we are going to create this accept file. Type shall be accept1, and we are using placeholder 0, which is a string attribute. That's just an interface, so it's not stored like this. It's a quick JSON hack. What I mean is that the name and the type is stored in the same field. And that shall be to-do entry. And if we save this, we can go and visit this file. It's valid, great. Now the problem is, the problem left is that where is our instance, to-do instance? That's the top one. So our files don't have the file type set, which means we have to either manually set all, or maybe I just remove them, and then we will recreate them. Actually, I think we are good with a single to-do instance here. So inside to-do, I lost my place, open it again. This is the to-do app. Inside inline, we need to set the type of that file when we create it. So dot type shall be, I'm going to use a quick hack and simply use the type, so that path. So shall be slash this one. And now, if we are lucky and enter a new entry, go levels up. This is our to-do instance. Type is set, great. So if we create a new one, drag and drop should work. Cool. Now maybe I want to change the text as well. That goes super easy. Inline. And here I want to make this editable. So I say O1 content editable. And data O1 content editable equals, and here we specify which field to edit, which is the body of the file. And then we have edit, and we can make a change and save. So it's very easy to make a website editable. So much for the to-do app. And yeah, as usual, as everybody's hiring, we're hiring as well. So if you are interested in know anybody, get in touch. And I'm open to any questions.
Is this open source?
No, it's not open source. I think open source works great for some problems, and this is not one of them. It can solve any problem, even complex problems, but it can't make it super simple in little time. So my plans are to make this product simple, because complex solutions already exist for the problem. They are, by the way, usually open source. So I want to make a not complex one. Any other questions?
Is the Boomla IDE written in Boomla?
Yes. It's a tool. Websites can be marked as a tool, which means that, so normally, if you wanted a YouTube video on your website, you have to create a trust file, and that way you can allow to embed resources that use youtube.com, this domain. So if you want to create a tool, which is a website that can access your website, so you can use it as a tool of yours, like a hammer, for working on your own website, you will lose the opportunity to embed external resources, because that would be an opportunity for data leak. But otherwise, you can write your own as well. And just by the way, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. As for the open source part, so Boomla will come with a freemium business model. So you can download and use it yourself for free. And you can also create websites on Boomla.net subdomains for free. We will have to put in some resource usage limitations to not let it go out of the roof. But otherwise, I do plan to keep a free plan for anyone to create websites. So essentially, if you want it on your own domain, then you can support us. Otherwise, you can use it for free. And also, you can host it on your own servers, if that helps. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
You put migration code. For example, if you would like to change the file types and not by recreating things, you should create a new app, I guess. But
migration code, as in when we change the platform, or when you change an application?
An application.
So essentially, when the user is upgrading the application, the question is, where would you put that? So far, that was essentially it's not solved yet. It's on the closed roadmap, so will get done soon.
Maybe just a strange observation. Are all hash codes starting with 01?
Are all? Oh, actually they are, because it's a version prefix. So in the future, we will have to change the hash function. So essentially, it's just a prefix, the version prefix. So the next hash will start with 02. Wow, you spot that. Interesting.
Is the close big?
So what we want to do now is to So right now we are working on the front end because this drag and drop functionality, for example, if I go onto, maybe it was advanced, where is this gallery? Here's it. So you can see there are two icons, but if you just land on the system, it's very hard to understand how they work, and also when you drop something, how can you position it relative to the file at the front and the one behind it. So to see and understand the structure it turns out, quite hard for users. And so we are working on a different front end that makes it more obvious and more intuitive. So first, we want to make the user tools better. Then we want to create more apps so that if you want to create, either as a programmer you want to use it or as an end user you want to use it, you will have a broader collection of applications which you can work with. These two are the closest things which we want to focus on.
I have another question. So you mentioned that this was inspired partially by functional programming.
Yes.
And as I understand correctly, that means that you use persistent data structures, and you mentioned also referential transparency.
Okay.
So these are the two main things which is brought for functional programming.
Yes. So first of all, at the bottom of the platform, we kill the idea of processes, which is normal on any operating system. That's the standard to have processes. So we don't have processes at all. This is one. Then the file system is indeed copy and write, so it's immutable. And the whole stack of applications is clean as in functional programming. These are the three main points.
Can you explain a bit more what do you mean by referential transparency?
Well, for example, if I have a file extension .php in my WordPress website, it doesn't specify what PHP version is it, how it's configured, etc. So essentially, it's between the website and your host operating system, there's this PHP language or interpreter installed, and it's not part of your website. So what I mean by referential transparency is that all the names or applications that are defined can be understood just by knowing your website's file system. Is that wrong?
Maybe it's this. So I don't see it. So I think referential transparency means that you can replace every reference to anything which is interesting by the reference object.
Okay.
So is the same or?
Yeah, you're right. I think I'm mixing up something here. But actually, now that you say you could replace the apps with collapsing the type chain, but you were right. My answer was wrong. Okay. Thanks for fixing it or clearing it up. Any other questions?
Have you considered more type-safe programming languages?
Like more type-safe than JavaScript?
Yeah.
So the problem here is that to go to market, you also need, so essentially on the web, JavaScript is the most popular language, or at least it will be in the close future. And for that reason, and also because it was quite easy to embed a JavaScript engine into this platform, I just went with it. I hope to add more, but it just, so essentially for other considerations, the reasons for different considerations, not because JavaScript might be the ideal language. I personally don't like it as much. It just gave itself like that. So it's just language number one. In the future, there will be more. So there are not too many options for embedding a language. And also I had to start with the languages which I know. Any other questions?
I just interject.
Yeah, sure.
So the pizza has arrived. I suggest that we take the remaining questions offline. If you guys have any questions, please ask Tibor as we are eating the pizza so it doesn't get cold. So thank you, Tibor.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.